Sugod na ta!
Second example. Find the Fourier series of the function f of x of period p is equal to 2L, where your piecewise function is equal to -1 if your x is greater than -2 but less than 0, and +1 if your x is greater than 0 but less than 2, and your period is equal to 4. So we will try to graph your function. Let's say this will be your negative x is equal to -2, x is equal to +2, y is equal to -1, y is equal to +1. So your piecewise function, f of x is equal to -1. So f of x is equal to -1 if your x is from -2 to 0. So from -2 to 0, your y or your f of x is equal to -1. Next, from your x is equal to 0 to +2, so from x is equal to 0 to +2, your y is equal to +1. So this would be the illustration of the piecewise function given above. So to solve for its Fourier series, we need to find your a sub o, your a sub n, and your b sub n. So to find your a sub o, thus your a sub o, is equal to 1 over L integral -L to L f of x dx. Given that your period is equal to 2L, thus your p is equal to 2L, and given that the piecewise function has period of 4, this is equal to 4, therefore your L is equal to 4 divided by 2, so that would be equal to 2. So your AO would be is equal to 1 over 2 or 1/2 integral of -2 to 2, which is your L, f of x dx. But your function is a piecewise function having two equations. So that would be your a sub o is equal to 1/2 integral of -2 to 2. Your f of x sub 1 plus your f of x sub 2 dx. But your function 1 and function 2 have different limits. So your s sub o would be equal to 1/2 times the integral of your f of x sub 1, which is equal to -1. So that will be -1 dx, which has a limit of -2 to 0. So that will be -2 to 0 plus the integral of your function f of x sub 2, so that will be +1, so 1 dx, or simply dx, and its limit from 0 to 2 was from 0 to 2. Then we need to solve the equation. Integrate. So your a sub o is equal to 1/2 times the integral of -1 dx is equal to -x. So that will be -x from the limits of -2 to 0 plus the integral of dx is equal to x, or the integral of 1 dx is equal to x, so that will be x from 0 to 2. So substituting its limit, it is up the upper limit minus the lower limit. That is the law of your integral, so that will be 1/2. So for the first function, upper minus lower, so that will be negative 0, or simply 0 times negative, so that will be 0, minus the lower limit, so that is negative times negative 2. Plus, we have now the second function. So upper minus lower, so that will be 2, minus the lower limit 0. Then simplify the equation. You have a sub 0 is equal to 1/2. So 0 minus negative 2. So that will be negative 2 times negative, so that will be positive 2. Positive 2 times negative, so that will be negative 2. 0 minus 2, so that will be negative 2. Plus 2 minus 0 equal to positive 2, so that will be positive 2. Now, negative simplified, erase of 0, erase above. Is equal to negative 2 plus 2, that will be equal to 0. 0 times 1/2, so that will be equal to 0. So your a sub o is equal to 0. Thus, you have your a sub o is equal to 0. Then you have your a sub o. Now we need to find your a sub n. So for your a sub n, you will have a sub n is equal to 1 over L integral of negative L to L f of x times cosine n pi x over L dx. Then our L is equal to 2, so therefore substitute L is equal to 2. You have your a sub n is equal to 1/2 integral of your f of x sub 1 plus f of x sub 2 cosine n pi x over 2, that is the value over L dx, from limit of negative 2 to 2. Then distribute cosine inside, so you will have a sub n is equal to 1/2 then two different limits of your function. So you have your f of x sub 1, which is negative 1, or we have negative dx from limit of negative 2 to 0. Oh, sorry, we forgot. This would be negative times your cosine, so that will be cosine n pi negative, sorry, that will be negative cosine n pi x over 2 dx plus the second function, which is equal to 1, positive 1. So positive 1 times cosine, so that will be cosine n pi x over 2 dx from 0 to 2. So let us continue. We have your a sub n is equal to 1/2. The integral of negative cosine n pi x over 2, so that will be sine, negative sine n pi x over 2 divided by n pi over 2, and that's a limit of negative 2 to 0 plus the integral of cosine n pi x over 2, so that will be sine n pi x over 2 divided by n pi over 2, limits of 0 to 2. Then simplify the equation. So you have a sub n is equal to 1/2. Then you will have reciprocal times the reciprocal divide. So sine n pi x over 2 divided by n pi over 2. So that will be negative 2 sine n pi x over 2 over n pi from the limit of negative 2 to 0 plus, so sine n pi x over 2 divided by n pi over 2, so that will be 2 sine n pi x over n pi, limits of 0 to 2. So let us substitute the limit, the upper and lower limit, so that will be a sub n is equal to 1/2. For the first function, so you have negative 2 sine n pi times 0, so that will be 0. 0 divided by 2, so that will be sine of 0 divided by n pi minus negative 2 sine n pi times negative 2, so that will be negative 2 n pi divided by 2. But negative 2 divided by 2, so that would be negative 1. Negative 1 times n pi, so this would be negative 1 n pi, or negative n pi over n pi, plus the second function, so you have 2 sine n pi times 2, so that will be 2 n pi over n pi minus the lower limit, so you have 2 sine n pi times 0, so that will be 0. Sorry, this function must be n pi x over 2, since we have n pi x over 2 above. This would be n pi x over 2. That would be your correction. So you have now, so this function, from your upper limit from this function, so this would be 2 n pi times 2, so that will be n pi divided by 2, so that will be 2 sine n pi times 2, so that will be 2 n pi divided by 2, so that will be n pi, so this will be sine n pi minus, you have 2 sine n pi times 0, so that will be 0. 0 divided by 2, so this will be sine 0 over n pi. This is 2 sine 0 minus 2 sine 0 divided by n pi. Simplify the equation, so you have a sub n is equal to 1/2. So sine of 0, that would be equal to sine of 0, that is equal to 0. So 2 times 0, 0 divided by 0, 0 divided by n pi, so this would be equal to 0. So 0 minus negative, so that would be positive. So this will be positive. The remaining term would be 2 sine negative n pi over n pi plus you have your sine 0, this will be equal to 0. So 2 sine n pi over n pi divide minus 0, so that will be 2 sine n pi over n pi. This will be 2 sine n pi over n pi. But remember, from your trigonometry, your sine negative theta is equal to negative sine theta. So your 2 sine negative n pi is just equal as negative 2 sine n pi. So substitute the equivalent from your trigonometry. So this will be a sub n is equal to 1/2. You have now negative 2 sine n pi divided by n pi plus 2 sine n pi over n pi. So negative 2 sine n pi divided by n pi plus 2 sine n pi divided by n pi, so that would be equal to 0. So your a sub n is also equal to 0. So your a sub is 0 and your a sub n is equal to 0. Now we need to solve for your b sub n. Now let us solve for your b sub n. Your b sub n is equal to 1 over L, integral of negative L to L, f of x sine n pi x over L dx. Then we have L is equal to 2, so substitute. We have b sub n is equal to 1 over 2, integral of negative 2 to 2. You have your f of x sub 1 plus f of x sub 2. Then you have sine n pi x over 2 dx. So for your x sub 1, you have the limits of negative 2 to 0. So your b sub n is equal to 1/2 times the integral of your f of x sub 1, so that will be negative 1 times sine, so it's negative sine n pi x over 2. This will be negative sine n pi x over 2 dx from negative 2 to 0, plus you have the second function, so that will be positive 1 times sine n pi x over 2, so that will be sine n pi x over 2 dx from 0 to 2. Then we need to integrate the function. So Bn, B sub n is equal to 1/2 times the integral of negative sine n pi x over 2 is equal to positive cosine n pi x over 2 divided by n pi over 2. So the positive cosine n pi x over 2 divided by n pi over 2, which is a limit of negative 2 to 0 plus the integral of sine n pi x over 2 is equal to negative cosine. This will be negative cosine n pi x over 2 divided by n pi over 2. Limits of 0 to 2. So simplify the function. So you have b sub n is equal to 1/2. So cosine n pi x over 2 divided by n pi over 2. So you have 2 cosine n pi x over 2. Over n pi. Limits of negative 2 to 0. Plus, you have negative times positive, so that will be negative. So, cosine n pi x over 2 divided by n pi over 2, so this will be 2 cosine n pi x over 2 divided by n pi. Limits, just write that down. You have 2 cosine n pi x over 2 over n pi from 0 to 2. Let's substitute the limits. So you have your b sub n is equal to 1/2. So for your first function, substitute x to 0. So you have 2 cosine n pi times 0, so that will be 0, divided by 2, so that is equal to 0, divided by n pi, minus the lower limit. So you have 2 cosine, so you have n pi times negative 2, so that would be negative 2 n pi, negative 2 n pi divided by 2, so that would be negative n pi, negative n pi divided by n pi, minus your second function. For your second function, you have 2 cosine n pi times 2, so that will be 2 n pi divided by 2, so that will be equal to n pi over n pi, minus the lower limit. So you have 2 cosine n pi x times 0, so that will be 0, divided by 2, so that is equal to 0 over n pi. Now let us simplify. So you have b sub n is equal to 1/2. Then you have cosine 0 is equal to 1, positive 1. So 2 times 1, so that will be 2, divided by n pi, so this would be equal to 2 over n pi. Should be 2 over n pi, minus 2 cosine negative n pi over n pi. But remember, from your trigonometry, your cosine negative theta is equal to cosine theta. So therefore, your 2 cosine negative n pi is just equal to 2 cosine n pi. So therefore, this function, 2 cosine negative n pi divided by n pi, is just equal to 2 cosine n pi over n pi. So, 2 cosine n pi over n pi times negative, so this will be negative minus 2 cosine n pi over n pi. So, cosine of 0, this will be equal to 1. So, 1 times 2 is 2. 2 divided by n pi, so that is 2 n pi. So, negative 2 over n pi times negative, so that would be positive 2 n pi. Positive 2 over n pi. Simplify the function, so you combine like terms, so you have bn is equal to 1 half. So 2n pi plus 2n pi, so that would be equal to 4n pi. 4 over n pi, sorry. Minus 2 cosine n pi over n pi minus 2 cosine n pi over n pi, so that will be equal to cosine, that will be 4 cosine n pi over n pi. 4 cosine n pi over n pi. Factor out the common. The common is 4 over n pi, so that will be bn is equal to 1 half times 4 over n pi times, factor out, so 1 minus cosine n pi. So your b sub n is equal to 1 half times 4 n pi, so that will 1 half times 4 over n pi, so that will be 2 over n pi. 2 over n pi times 1 minus cosine n pi. So this should be your b sub n. So you have 2 over n pi, sorry. So 2 over n pi times 1 minus cosine n pi. So that's it. Now you have your a sub o, a sub n, and b sub n. So we can now solve for our Fourier series. Now for a Fourier series, you have your f of x is equal to a sub o over 2, where a sub o is equal to 0, so this will be 0 divided by 2, plus the summation of your a sub n. A sub n is equal to 0, so that is 0 times cosine n pi x over your L, which is equal to 2, plus b sub n, so you have 2 over n pi times 1 minus cosine n pi times sine n pi x over L, which is equal to 2. That is would be the summation of n is equal to 1 to infinity. To simplify your function, so you have your f of x is equal to 0 divided by 2, so that will be equal to 0. Your cosine, 0 times a number, so 0 times cosine, so this will be 0. This would be also 0. So the remaining term would be, it would be the summation of 2 over n pi times 1 minus cosine n pi times sine n pi x over 2 when your n is equal from 1 to infinity. So let's say we have n is equal to 1, 2, and 3, and so on. So let us substitute. So your f of x, when n is equal to 1, you have 2 over 1 times pi, so that will be pi, times 1 minus 1 times pi, so that will be cosine pi, sine, substitute n is equal to 1, so you have pi x over 2, plus, when your n is equal to 2, so that will be 2 over 2 pi times 1 minus cosine, substitute n is equal to 2, so you have cosine 2 pi times sine, substitute n is equal to 2, 2 pi x over 2, plus, for your n is equal to 3, so you have plus 2 over, substitute n is equal to 3, so that will be 3 pi times 1 minus cosine n pi, so that will be cosine 3 pi times sine 3 pi x over 2, plus, so on and so forth. Simplify the equation, so you will have now the cosine pi is equal to negative 1. So you can have negative 1 minus negative 1, so you have 2. Negative 1 minus negative 1 is equal to 2 times 2 over pi, so that will be 4 over pi. So your f of x is equal to 4 over pi. 4 over pi times sine pi x over 2, so this is times sine pi x over 2, plus cosine 2 pi is equal to 0, equal to positive 1. 1 minus 1 is equal to 0. 0 times any number is equal to 0. So for your second term, when your n is equal to 2, then it is equal to 0. Plus, for your n is equal to 3, so you have your cosine 3 pi is equal to negative 1. 1 minus negative 1, that is equal to 2. 2 times 2 over 3 pi, so that will be 4 over 3 pi. 4 over 3 pi times sine 3 pi x over 2, plus, so on and so forth. So simplify. So the common will be 4 over pi. So factor out 4 over pi. So sine your f of x is equal to, let's factor out 4 over pi. So the remaining term would be 4 over pi times sine pi x over 2 plus 1/3 sine 3 pi x over 2 plus, so on and so forth. So this will be your Fourier series of your piecewise function given.